Hi, this is another episode of Mix and Matchbox. I am your host, Brent Feldman, and we are joined today by Dan Novalis. He is the CEO of 2Novas. Hi, Dan. How are you
Hello,
doing?
it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast. I know that we've got a decent amount of content coming out together. Thank you so much for having me on the Bank Marketing Podcast. So hopefully we'll be seeing a lot of each other out there in the media ecosystem.
Yes, taking over St. Louis and then the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you being here, and I know that you've got definitely quite a sort of business built up around consulting with banks and credit unions and offering really sage advice from not only a strategy but really kind of marketing CMO type of sort of position. But you've been this sort of consultant for over 7 years, but your background is actually in engineering and data. How'd you draw that line? How'd you get from one to the other?
It was a long process. Yeah, no, I mean, I just the career arc summary, right? My undergrad was in computer science, so I was like a software developer originally, but I got interested in kind of the business problems I was solving rather than just kind of coding blindly. And started working did consulting for a while. I started working for an advertising technology startup back when it was, my biggest client was like MySpace. And so got into the advertising and marketing side that way. Years passed. I got my MBA to like learn more about how to think through business problems versus just the technology problems, and that kind of led to this. So, right, I was working for a big agency on data management platforms for marketing data. And then just kind of got to the point where it's like, I want to do my own thing. I want to have more impact on businesses overall versus a little tiny slice of, hey, let's optimize your marketing, increase your conversion by 0.5% or something, which is a huge deal for a billion, multi-billion-dollar business. But I really wanted to work with smaller clients, kind of be on my own. And so that's the 7 years ago, kind of hopped out, started my own agency. So and the banks was not a fluke, but as an agent, there's thousands of agencies. So being a marketer, you need a way to differentiate yourself, and that's either you can do that by being the best at building websites, like you guys, or niching into an industry. And I ended up with a couple banking clients. So I said, hey, this is interesting. Like, bank marketing seems dry on the surface, but because all banks offer the same thing, because it's all commoditized, it's really a marketing problem. Like, how do you get more customers to your bank with your checking account versus the same exact checking account down the street? It's marketing. It's a brand differentiation problem. So I really got into it because I found that interesting. It's like, well, everything's the same. How do you tell different stories? And the rest is kind of history. So
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely. I think of bank marketing and you think of like, but we differentiate based on service. And you're like, oh, okay.
great. Yeah. So does everyone else.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, because of your background in engineering and data, what are ways that you look at marketing strategy maybe differently than someone that actually has just a marketing or a business background?
Yeah, right. So most of my work is strategy work. I am not a full service agency, right? I used to do that stuff, and now I'm focused on what is the marketing that you need to be doing, right? If you talk to a digital ad agency, they're going to tell you need digital ads. Talk to an SEO agency, they're going to tell you need SEO. I try to play in the space of like, look, every bank would probably benefit from all of those things, but what do you need now, right? On your limit, if you have a limited marketing budget, what do you need first? What's the most important thing? And I think that kind of prioritization probably comes from my engineering background of like, what's the most important thing. But so much of what I do too is the test and learn approach, which is really from coding. Is let's try something, let's see what happens, let's improve it. It's not yeah, a lot of kind of old school bankers still think about marketing and advertising as like the, you know, the Don Draper, like let's sit back, come up with a great slogan, come up with a great pitch. And in a commoditized industry, that just doesn't work. You know, you've really got to figure out who you're trying to talk to, right? And so, yeah, a lot of banks will say we're trying to appeal to everybody. We have solutions for every financial need, but you just come across, it's just dry. And we see 10,000 ads a day, and so like that, if you're just saying like, come to us for your banking needs, we will solve your financial problems, it's not memorable.
Yeah.
So it's really, it really is about like understanding, the work I do is understanding who the bank serves uniquely the best. And then what is the message? What's the problem you're solving for that customer? What's the message you need from it? And often that's where the test and learn comes in, is like, well, let's try something, or let's, you know, A/B test a couple different headlines on a web page or on an ad, and, you know, see what works the best. I think that, you know, that approach is kind of where marketing has been heading for a while, but it's also where, you know, what I learned kind of from my engineering background.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and definitely the proof can be in the data. So, you know, as you test things and refine things. And I love that encouragement, you know, of like, you know, helping banks not only find a way to differentiate themselves in a highly commoditized environment, but, you know, really just finding, you know, what's going to work. And you have to do that through, you know, testing and refinement. And, you know, that's cool that you have that data experience to be able to contribute.
Yeah. And I think it's just from seeing the numbers, you start to learn, you know, your marketing is going to work better. You're going to have better bottom line results if you are everything to a smaller group of people versus trying to be a little bit of something for everybody. You know, if you can find the niche enough market that you serve so well and be the solution for them, that's going to end up being more business than this kind of generic message that serves the entire community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting, as I'm sure you've obviously talked to tons of banks and credit unions. You know, I'm curious from a data standpoint, where do you see the most under-leveraged data? You know, that all of these organizations are usually amassing data in one way or another, whether it be through, you know, online digital products, whether they're, you know, collecting data in some other form or fashion. Where do you see it going really under-leveraged, underutilized?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think the coolest sort of untapped, you know, data set is the bank's transactional data, which is a lot. It's super hard to do anything with, and I think that's the biggest reason not more is not being done. But like, if you think about just the potential of using that for marketing or understanding what a customer needs and is wanting to do, there's probably no better data source, but it's so heavy and complex. I think there's some AI companies starting to tap into it, and I think in the next couple of years are going to be pretty transformative for using transactional data. But I think in terms of like the last couple of years and what, you know, stuff you can do a little easier today, you know, I'd say just basic demographics and website data are the two where just banks are not, you know, especially the smaller end of kind of small to medium sized banks are not doing enough with. And that's just like simple. It can be something as simple as segmenting your email campaigns of, hey, we want to run a savings account campaign. Let's market our savings accounts to current customers that only have a checking account. Right. But the reason a 25-year-old is going to open up a savings account is much different than the reason a 65-year-old is going to open up one. And a lot of banks just kind of dump the whole list into, you know, MailChimp, and you're going to do a lot better just very basically send it to everybody, but have a slightly different message for younger customers saying save for your future versus save for retirement. And little changes, I mean, that's super, super simple, but little changes can make a huge difference. And that data is pretty easy to get. I mean, from the website too, like there's so many tools out there that you can see what people have done on your site and, you know, and send them marketing messages like current customers that, usually come on and just log right into online banking, but now are looking at your savings account page, looking at your mortgage page. And you can infer a lot of intent that way. And there's tools out there now that make that pretty straightforward and easy. That's just an area where I think every bank could be doing some level of that, but haven't seen it as often as you'd think.
That's really cool. I really appreciate the encouragement on even some sort of like small amount of personalization. You don't have to get customer by customer, but can you do a better job of segmenting your list so that you can at least not be talking to everybody like they're big one swath of people? It's like, how can I be a little more articulate? And then you'll just get better performance out of that if you have, essentially somebody who's seeing that message and understanding, oh, this wasn't just a general open a savings. Like, okay. Yeah.
Well, that's how I try to work with my clients. Like, there's so much marketing content out there that's like, well, get Salesforce Marketing Cloud and you can do this like 87-step, decision tree onboarding journey. And it's like, great, you could do that.
Yeah.
But the majority of banks I work with just don't know what they need to do, or haven't even done much of like an email newsletter. And I think there's a lot of steps to get there. And I think that it's the first few steps of just that simple segmentation that make a huge difference. And you can always get more sophisticated down the line, but just starting, can make a big difference.
That's great. Well, I'm sure, as you've seen, like probably a lot of through lines that go through, sort of challenges that other banks and credit unions seem to face. One that when we were chatting the other day, you had mentioned was a CRM sort of issue. So how, I'd love for you to shape this up, but like, how in your eyes do you see service lines causing that rift in CRMs? And I assume this is probably a challenge that more than one bank or credit union has faced.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a larger just issue overall. Before I got into banks and credit unions, it was working big enterprises, and they had this issue too of each department's got their own CRM. And in a bank, the case study is more like the loan department's got their own, the retail department has got their own, and they don't integrate, or they're or even if it's the same CRM, they're not using them in the same way. And the incentives are different. Your commercial lenders want to get the leads in, they want to get the loans going. At the same time, the retail department wants to earn the deposit accounts of those borrowers. But the lenders are not incentivized to like help with the deposit accounts. So they'll pass in, oh, here's this email, this guy I've been talking to, like go talk to them. And sometimes it's a CRM, it's a CRM problem that might not be related to like CRM software, if that makes sense, like just a relationship management thing. And so, I've worked with some banks that are better at this than others. And where I see it work the best is when, the lenders can get the retail department involved early and even incentivize the lenders somewhat on that deposit relationship so that it's part of the early conversation. But that often, where the CRM software comes in is tracking all the notes, because the lender may be taking a client out to dinner and learning a bunch, and there's no place for that information to go. And so the retail team often has to start anew. So I think like it's just inherent in the way the banks are structured, but I think there's a technology path that can solve it, but it's not just technology. It's this cultural, kind of setup that you could buy. I see a lot of banks buying a CRM and then are surprised kind of when it doesn't solve the problem because one of the teams is not using it.
Yeah.
So you've got to address those kind of cultural things first.
Yeah, that you have the tools, but if they're not being used, they aren't going to fix the problems in and of themselves.
Yeah.
So, I was going to ask, on top of that, like, what are some fixes? And I feel like, naming, like the cultural incentives, making sure that, people are, that there isn't sort of drop off or lag there. But I assume that, unification of like one, big CRM that applies to everybody isn't going to fix the problem in
and that may be the fix, but it's not the first thing you should do. Right? The first thing you should do is kind of analyze analyze like if you have a problem of lenders, your loan officer is not passing information over to your retail team. That's going to continue even if you buy a CRM, right? So fix that problem first, and then at some point, that technology, you'll feel the technology problem of that. They say, great, well, our lenders are sending this over, but they're just emailing their raw notes, and it's super hard to manage. That's where technology can can help. The technology, you've got to find technology that fits your process first. And so I see a lot of banks, we got Salesforce, and then nobody uses it, and they cancel a year or two later, but they've spent, well into the 5 figures or more on it by that point. Yeah, I see the same thing too. The other thing I was going to mention on that is like on the data side, it's the same kind of thing. A lot of banks are right now going through a big kind of data warehousing process, and they spend a year or two building this big data warehouse that can be used for marketing and reporting and all this other stuff. And then it's just, it's underutilized when it launches because everybody was thinking about the data and the tech part, but not the process part.
Yeah.
So I think it's really the when you've got these interdepartmental things, you really got to think about what's the ideal process. Can we get everybody starting down that path, and then we'll need the technology along the way. Technology can make it easier, but technology is not going to solve a process problem.
Oh, I love that. That's sage advice. Well, cool. And kind of continuing on with the the problem solving sort of things. I know that you mentioned, incentive gap, process gap, solve these process things. I guess in general, like as you see some of these gaps, how they occur, what are the things that you're putting in place to help bridge them? Like, what does the solve end up becoming? And one thing I'll throw out there, and definitely another person in the St. Louis area here, as we are both mutually in the St. Louis area, is that I know NBC is working with Whistle Rewards. Chris Dornfeld, I think he's the CEO of Whistle Rewards. It's a incentive platform. And so maybe if that was, people don't have those incentives there, maybe they can use a tool in order to, let's say they get the process. Here's how we want to incentivize people. Now here's the technology solution for it. But are there any other things that you can think of that are, specifically bridging those gaps where maybe the process is there and now they need, something to help fix that?
Yeah, I think, talking about like incentives and loyalty, right? Like a lot of banks rely on we'll pay you $300 to open an account. And I think that works real well for the really big, Chase and Bank of America, and the really big banks that can just kind of, the $300 doesn't matter to them as much. But what that does is you're incentivizing just the bare minimum to do. And so I've talked to a lot of banks that are like, well, we did this, and then 6 months ago, what we really want to do from a marketing perspective is six months later, analyze, which accounts are still open, which accounts moved more money in, and they all earn the $300, but like which became long-term clients. And it's like, but you created this incentive structure to just earn the money. And like what you're not doing in that time is building the loyalty or giving them the reason to bank at a community bank versus a Chase or Bank of America. So you're going to attract people by putting the $300 out there. You're going to attract the window shoppers, and some other bank's going to have a $350 offer. And that's, people are going to go to the biggest one. What you should really be doing is building that loyalty. So if $300 offer gets them in the door, great. But I see too often like banks do that and then not have an onboarding flow that teaches them. Like Midwest Bank Center is so great at explaining what the community bank does for the community, right? And I think when people, it's really complicated to explain, and it's great for like an onboarding sequence over a few months. And what they do so well is just explaining like every dollar invested in your community gets recirculated 6 times or whatever the statistic is. And it starts to click in people's minds of like, oh yeah, I'd rather support, if I put my money in this local bank, it gets lent out to the coffee shop, it gets lent out to the construction company to, build this new development. And you're building that loyalty. And then a few months later, you feel like, well, I can't go back to the big bank where it's going to the shareholders in a big city. Because I think the it more than just a loyalty program or a single incentive. It's, you know, does that reward program help to tell that story, help to tell your bank story over a few months?
Yeah.
And you know, and build that up. So like you've got to think of the incentive as might open the door, might get people to pay attention to you through all the noise, but it's not enough. You know, you've got to build that structure in their mind of why they're banking with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, that's so important. Because, you know, it's not just about doing the thing. It's about the follow through. It's about, you know, making sure that it's, you know, like, all right, cool. We put the incentive, you know, policy, you know, in place. And now we're going to run the thing and it'll be fine. And it's like, no, you know, like there's so much more opportunity after that. And when that, you know, opportunity isn't taken, then you see the drop off, or like, you know, the investment may not have been worth it to, you know, just like put that $300 out there. Oh, this is a brand building opportunity. It's a relationship building opportunity. It, you know, the loyalty is what theoretically the word is, you know, it's like you're wanting to have loyalty, and you don't get that by giving somebody a one-time incentive. They're like, sweet, that's a perk.
Well, right, because like the incentive, the $300 is usually earned by, okay, open an account and do like five qualifying transactions in the first 90 days, and that can be a direct deposit. So you can go just change your payroll and put $50 direct deposit from your paycheck every 2 weeks, and you'll earn the $300. Mm-hmm. That's actually pretty easy to do. But what's harder is making that your primary account, like changing all of your automated payments and all of your, you know, all of the tools you've connected to your bank account, you know, if you've had it for a few years. That's really hard. Mm-hmm. But I don't see a lot of banks like working with you to do that. Yeah. Sit down and review your statement and say, hey, we'll make you a to-do list. We'll, you know, we're wanting to help you with these things. It's more just, great, you've earned the reward. And yeah, it's so easy to just kind of cancel after that. So
yeah. That's cool. I like the idea of like thinking through those kind of programs, those policies, that idea just more thoroughly, you know. You know, I guess in terms of brand and marketing strategy, sometimes they're, you know, like the process can be overwhelming to, whether that be leadership, the board, marketing people. You know, it seems like there's a lot to dig into, whether that be data, perspectives. You've got maybe, you know, competing, you know, perspectives on how it should be executed. But for, you know, there's not everybody wants to get into a long process of discovery. How do you help with getting banks maybe where they need to be from a marketing perspective without going overkill on a 6-month deep dive into a brand strategy?
Sure. You know, the first thing I usually do, so most of the clients I work with, when they come to me, it's like, we just don't know what we need to do. That's we've done some marketing, we spent some money on Google ads, it didn't work, but we know, you know, our customer base is aging out. Like, we know we need to do something else, but we just don't know what to do, and we've wasted enough money just trying things. So the first thing I will usually do is a short, say 4 to 6 week kind of strategy project, but we were talking about like unification and alignment between departments, and that's a lot of what it is. I feel like, you know, half marketer, half kind of psychologist in a way of, you know, what that process looks like. The way I do it, and this comes from my consulting background, is just, I want to interview like all the department heads and just understand what are their incentives, what are they trying to make happen this year, in the next 2 or 3 years, and kind of look for patterns across departments. And so I'll usually come in to the bank for a day and talk to people, get everybody in a room to kind of workshop through. We'll do like, you know, kind of fun things like, you know, if you're familiar with like design thinking, like a newspaper headline article. So what if like the Wall Street Journal writes a front page article about your bank in 5 years? What does that headline say? Right. And then what are the subheadings? Like what's the supporting data to back that up? And it really gets everybody to think through what's really important. Mm-hmm. And from that, I've worked with enough banks, I can, you know, they're all selling the same stuff, but like I said a minute ago, the customer they serve uniquely well is often different, and that's what we're trying to kind of get at. And so that'll usually come out in that headline exercise and some of the other discussions we have, and then it's just like unifying the strategy around that. So one bank we did this with a couple years ago, they're your average community bank, right? 5 branches, but all in kind of one major metro area. And through those discussions, we said, well, the thing they do most uniquely is mortgages for their area. There are some unique things with how property tax was done, and how just the housing market in that area that they were really good at. And most of their competitors, they were the only community bank nearby, so most of their competitors were big national companies or large banks. And that we were able to weave a message that was like, hey, we can help you buy your first home or qualify for a home if you have low credit, because we know these specific 3 things about the local market. And so, yeah, you can get your mortgage anywhere, but you should come here because we know these things about the market. We can get you a better rate. We can qualify you for more. We know what will happen with your property taxes after you close, so we can prepare you for that. And that became the centerpiece of the strategy. So then everything else we planned to do was based around that. And bigger banks may have 2 or 3 things like that, but it's really to try to break down the overwhelmingness of a brand strategy. It's like, what is that core message? What are the 2 or 3 groups you serve uniquely well? And to me, having been in marketing for a long time, like once you have that, the activities you need to do to reach them kind of just fall out. Yeah. Right? It's first-time home buyers in this particular market, so we know where they go in that market. We know what media they're on, and we can craft a specific strategy around that.
Yeah, that's cool.
That takes the bank from we want to be everything to everybody to here's the 3 groups we're really trying to reach.
Yeah, definitely having a focus. I feel like that's wonderful. And I feel like, sometimes it's hard to get to, but it's good to have somebody like yourself come in and try to discover those things.
Yeah, you need the outsider perspective to see it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Reading the reading the label from the inside of the jar or whatever they say, yeah. Like, it can be really tough. And it's interesting. Sometimes that information, and maybe you found this too, is actually sitting on the surface. Like I'll talk to, plenty of people who are at banks and credit unions. They're like, yeah, we've got a variety of products to serve all the people that, we can. But then, a little bit more digging, and I mean, like, not too much really. It's like, oh, well, who do you serve mostly? And like, oh, we do really well with nonprofits because of this and this and this, and we serve all these bits. You're like, oh, well, that's it. That's
exactly. And and banks are just afraid to focus on a core group or 2 because they're, well, what about all this other business? Like, you will get more of that business by doing this. And actually, a bank like Midwest Bank Center, I've seen this. They'll talk about this, but other similar banks set up too. You push out in the community with this message of helping everybody, mm-hmm. and they won a lot of commercial business from that message. They weren't saying we do the best commercial lending there is. They're saying we're helping the disadvantaged parts of St. Louis. But then all these other kind of mid-sized big companies here said, great, we want to do that too. That's part of our mission too. We want to bank with these guys.
Yeah.
And you're gonna, when it becomes part of your brand, you're gonna capture all this other business. So.
Yeah. Highlighting what you care about, can help you. Yeah. Yield more because people want to care. They want to know that they're banking with somebody who cares.
Yeah. Something. Because you can get a mortgage or a loan anywhere, why they choose you is more of our do we have shared goals?
Mm-hmm.
Do our values align with that bank's values? And so if that can come out in your storytelling, then that's how you're gonna do the best.
That's awesome. Great. Well, turning a little bit to websites, and maybe this is just because this is what we do at Matchbox, but my feeling is that websites should be the lifeblood of basically any business that has an online presence. And I think this applies to banks. And I could state my case and rationale for it, but these, platforms, unfortunately at website, platforms are sometimes connected to, outdated tech. Sometimes things can get, neglected. But what's the case for maybe making a website a bigger focus of a bank sort of marketing effort?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is every single one of your customers and every single one of your prospects will be on your website, right? And for current customers, it's like they're going to be on there maybe multiple times a week, and it's the best way to consistently get in front of them. And for prospects, it's like when somebody's searching for banking services, they're looking at 5 different bank websites in a couple of seconds, or maybe a little longer than that. But if you actually sit down to look for a bank, you're going to be looking at multiple websites really quickly in succession. And what that does, and if you have, I'll suggest to my clients, like, do this. Go sit in your branch and Google banks near me,
Mm-hmm.
and then go look at the top 5 results.
Yep.
Right. And just really give yourself 5 minutes to do it. So you're not looking too in depth and overanalyzing the details. You're just getting a skimming and getting a sense, do you get a sense of the brand of those banks in the first few seconds? And it's pretty eye-opening of just that perspective, because it's, again, like seeing the label from the inside of the jar. That's how most banks look at their website, and they're not looking at competitors too often.
Yeah.
But when people are searching, it's like you're looking at all those. And so if your bank has an outdated site, at least relative to those other 5 banks that you show up in Google search results for, it's immediately going to stand out, and you're off the list, like, before you even get a chance to talk to the person. So that doesn't mean you need, it also doesn't mean you need to like compete with Bank of America's website, right? People understand you're a community bank, but more so than just the technology, it's the story and drawing people in. Does your headline, the headline isn't the be all end all of your site. The headline gets people to read the next part of your site, and that part gets them to read the next part of your site. So can you weave that story? That doesn't always take a Bank of America level of technology, but it takes more than the 10 or 12-year-old site that a lot of smaller banks especially have. And so you need to think about it as a digital branch.
Yeah.
I often, the banks will say, well, we've got 5 branches, like the website's the 6th branch. And that's how you should really be thinking about it.
That's awesome. Well, I guess as AI has obviously become, a lot bigger, omnipresent, and basically, everything in marketing or everyday life, it feels like. I know that you've recently started consulting with banks and credit unions on helping, maybe introduce AI tech into their organizations. I'm sure with whether it be security, compliance concerns, this maybe seems like something that I could see people on the surface being maybe a little resistant to, even though it could augment their ability to perform. So I guess why is maybe the security or compliance issue not a concern in your mind, or how do you avoid problems as you lead sort of this industry into that fold?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some misconceptions about AI and where it is today. Right, it can do a lot, but a lot of the way it works is you have to tell it a kind of a framework, right? And how to think about the data you're giving it or what you want it to do. And it's really good at automating that stuff, or handling, if you're giving it data and telling it to do 3 different things, and then the data looks a little different one day, it's pretty good at adapting to that. But you've still got to today teach it the framework. Now, a few years that might change, but today it's there's ChatGPT, but then a lot of other AI technology is like automation and moving data between systems and those types of things. So I think from a security and compliance standpoint, it's what you're feeding it and how you're using it. So I would not go, you're probably not going to ChatGPT and dropping in, sensitive customer records and saying, tell me what else you can find about this customer online. Like, clearly shouldn't be doing that. But can you, a great use case is like the FDIC or a governmental body puts out some new regulations in a 70-page PDF. Drop that thing into ChatGPT and say, like, what do I need to know? I'm a marketer at a bank. What do I need to know? And it will highlight stuff, and you can go in and read the more in-depth part if you need to, but it can help you understand that a little better. It can help you from a marketing perspective. You can tell it to look at the compliance rules, and you can pass through your marketing campaign and say, tell me where I should be worried about this headline or this disclaimer from a compliance standpoint. And maybe it won't do 100% of your job for you yet, but it will get you there. It'll kind of point out some areas for you to be concerned with. So I think like a lot of banks are, and I mean, this is a pattern that a lot of banks do with any technology, but especially around AI, it's like, no, there's security concerns. Like we're not moving into AI yet. We're going to wait till it gets a little bit more mature. But I really think it's everything's moving so fast. If you're not doing anything with it, you're already behind, and you're going to be way more behind, way faster than, with other technology advancements in the past. So I think you've got to think about it. It's probably correct to be a little concerned with the security, but if you're thinking about it use case by use case, you should be able to find some ways to use it that don't touch customer data.
Yeah. As you say that, I'm thinking, maybe you'd endorse this kind of perspective of thought too, is that at the end of the day, you don't want that to be the thing that limits looking into what AI or, and maybe even as it gets branded AI, maybe it is, it's just, it's automation, it's machine learning, it's using data to, find outcomes and stuff like that. But I guess in general, you want people to not cut it off at the pass. You wanted to explore what it could do for the organization. You can then answer those security concerns if they come up. But I feel like, looking into, as you mentioned, you don't want to be behind, the curve as AI technology is constantly, improving, changing, and really honestly, like moving very, very fast.
Yeah.
So exploring the ideas of what it could do based on the things that are available, I feel like would be really important for organizations, as opposed to like being like, oh, we'll see what happens in a year or two, like you said.
Yeah, like it's AI today, right, in kind of early to mid 2025, is it can tell you a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not doing a lot of stuff yet. It will get there probably sooner in a much more frightening speed than we're anticipating, but today it's like you can create a tool that like determines a customer's credit worthiness or like loan approval. It's starting to kind of get to that, but it's not automatically getting a lead in from your website, approving a loan and funding the loan, right? It's not may get there pretty quickly, but like it's not doing that yet.
Yeah.
Right? So the use case is more what steps can it replicate? Where is your manual work? Where's the manual work for the bank, and can we automate that? And the AI comes in where for years we've been able to automate that stuff, but it used to be big coding project, might take months. AI can do that much faster now, and so those are the interesting use cases. But I think it's still really easy to segment it out from what you want to do and what you don't. And clearly, it's not ready yet to just sort of fund loans and push money around.
Yeah.
But so I think there's some real security concerns when you get to that point, and the world will get to that point. But if you're not at least experimenting with it today and looking for those opportunities to automate or save manual work, you're going to be way behind the curve when we get down to that point.
Cool. Well, that's definitely, it's good. Good advice. I've got a heady one for the last question here, and it's really just more conceptually thinking necessarily than, and maybe you might have a distinct answer here. But one big trend, that we're seeing in AI is, that customer service standpoint. And you mentioned AI right now is able to tell you something. It's able to give you, information and, maybe take from a big, catalog of SOPs or data or information maybe that the bank has. And, it could maybe, give you an answer based on all the information or criteria that it's fed. But I guess if banks are going to potentially start employing AI in a way that acts as a customer service representative for them, how do you think that they can maybe portray their brand and still feel like unique and different while using something that is more robotic and automated in order to like showcase who they are?
Yeah, I think so I've been consulting with a digital agent like AI chatbot startup in the financial services industry, and it's the word chatbot is like kind of how most people kind of understand the category, but there's a bunch of different kinds of chatbots, and the newer ones that are coming out like in the last 6 months, year, are really good. Like, the company I was working with continuously gets feedback from the customers of their clients, right? So like bank customers will, after a chatbot interaction, it will ask for a survey, and the consistently getting feedback of the customers at the point of getting the survey is when they realize it's a bot. And like, oh my gosh, I thought I was talking to a real human. So and this is a bot that sits on your site, right? But they're starting to get more specialized. So the one I worked with was specifically for financial services, and you could customize it to take people through an application flow or start collecting data from them and give them specialized offers based on the information, like in real time, based on the information they're putting into the bot. You can also train it on the bank's brand voice. You can train it on customer service, real live customer service conversations, and it will pick up on the cues and the way those interactions are happening. So I think it's another area where it's like there's the expectation that it's doing everything. It's not doing everything yet, but it feels a lot like a human, and a lot like a lot of banks that have chatbots. It's what are your hours? What's your routing number?
Yeah.
And that's really all it can do. And then it'll be like, well, great. This sounds like you need to talk to a customer service rep. But the new generation of chatbots takes it a lot further. It's a lot longer. You can get a lot more done. You can actually move money between accounts. You can open a CD. You can actually take some of these actions, and it feels human, right? Or the use case to think about there is like, it's not replacing human with AI. It's replacing if I want to transfer money or open a CD, maybe I can do that online. I got to log in. I got to figure out where it is. I got to maybe re-enter information in that I've already told the bank before. And it's a 30-click process to do it. But the bot, even if it's an automated thing, you can say, you just put in natural language, I want to move $10,000 from my savings account to this CD. And it'll say, hey, which CD? Do you want a 12-month, a 9-month? Here's the rates. Hey, if you move money in from outside the bank, we'll give you a better rate. Like, it can do those things. And frankly, from a customer experience standpoint, it's far easier than filling out forms and waiting for a call back and doing all that stuff. And so I think there's a balance of, back to your original question, like there's a balance of, yes, it's a bot, but if that bot is done well, it will feel enough like a human. And I think, people will appreciate that. Like, look, yeah, it's not a human, but it does the stuff I want.
Yeah.
I think people get frustrated with chatbots because they're not super smart chatbots, and they are frustrating to work with. But then people say, well, I'm not talking to the robot. But if you actually start interacting with an agent that feels much more human, it's a different experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. And I feel like that's great advice, and it ties back into maybe even just, the mission of having, just great service, having access to the things that you need to have access to. And if you can enable that and the experience is good, through whatever means that is, that's beneficial to the, whole presence of the, the chatbot there for the bank in general. Yeah. Because you want to be able to solve those needs for your customers. And it's funny, like, all right, this is a very simple transaction, but I do this. I'll like make an additional payment towards principal on a mortgage or something like that. But I have to call, and I'm like, it's like, maybe there's a way to do it. I've never been informed of the way to do this online, of where I just, want to not necessarily pay this, but do this. And like, if that was something that could be solved by a chatbot, and you'd be like, this is what I'm trying to do. And it's like, yeah, sure, makes it happen. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That would save
And
so much
and you
time.
don't mind you're talking to a computer because it just works.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think it's like, the banks are often like, especially community banks, try to differentiate on their service. And you call us, you get a real human. Great. Like a lot of people want that, but a lot of people don't. Or for me, I know personally, it's what sometimes I'll end up with a complex problem, and then I want to be able to reach a human immediately.
Mhm.
But then instead of going through the press one for this and all that, but then sometimes I just don't. It's a simple, straightforward thing that I can't just do in my online account, and I don't want to have to deal with a human.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to get it done. And that's where this newer generation of bots can help. It's just that, the straightforward stuff that you just want to get it done. And then that's great customer service and will endear me to that bank more, even though it's a robot and not a human.
Yeah, 100%. Well, cool. Well, honestly, that's all the questions I have for you, Dan. But I must say, it's been awesome chatting with you over, like these past, I guess month here or so since we first met. And I will say that you've had nothing but just incredible advice and strategy. And you could just honestly, you tell that this market so deeply. But it's funny that as you do this and you talk to a lot of banks, having that sort of expertise of not only knowing what to do, but having the experience of like talking to so many banks, I can always tell that like, there's a lot of scenarios that you can bring up that I've really enjoyed hearing your perspective and sort of like testing your depth of knowledge. And it's vast. So thank you so much with for sharing some of these like sage pieces of advice, and definitely I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode out there. I guess as people want to get in contact with you, what would you like to maybe toss out there for them to get in touch?
Yeah, well, first I appreciate all the kind words, and it's been fun being on here. Yeah, and if you want to get in touch, you can email me. It's just Dan at 2Novas.com, the number 2 and then Novas, or find me on LinkedIn. Happy to converse, through DMs on there as well.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, Dan, seriously, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and yeah, it was great to have you.
Yeah, likewise. Had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Definitely. Well, this has been another episode of Mix and Matchbox. I'm your host, Brent Feldman. We'll be back soon with more content. Please like and subscribe. Thanks.